And we are recording episode 933 on Wednesday, September 28th, 2022 at 2:03 p.m. Eastern Time with the one, the only Mr. Ric Prado, who is more of a badass in 1 minute of his waking day than I have been in my whole life. And I'm humble enough, or at least smart enough to admit that. Your book is absolutely incredible. Everyone that listens to this podcast knows I burned through audiobooks, 68 in the year 2022. And no bullshit, hand over my heart. This is the best book I've listened to this year. I genuinely mean that. I would tell you that off air, same as on air. I would take a lie detector test and say that is the best book I've listened to this year. I highly, highly recommend it to everybody. It's on Audible, so you don't even have to read it. 12 hours and 40 minutes long. It's absolutely fantastic. But so as to stop fanboying, Mr. Prado, please introduce yourself to all the listeners.
Tommy, my name is Ric Prado. I'm a retired CIA senior operations officer and paramilitary officer. And I'm really glad to be on the show with you.
Thank you, sir. So your book, I would say, if I could give it a one sentence review, it is the best pitch for America as a business, as a fraternity, as something to join. It is the best pitch for America I've heard. Anyone that listens to this podcast knows that I'm shamelessly patriotic. I love this country. I don't think there's anything wrong with loving your country. I've interviewed Delta Force operators, ground branch operators, Fossil Boz, Dale Comstock, Ron Moeller. I've interviewed Mike Durant, the pilot shot down in Mogadishu, countless other veterans. And I always come away with a strong sense of love for this nation, not in a Hollywood way, but knowing that the reality is a lot less sexy, much like you talk about in your book. There's not a Jason Bourne. The terrorist plot doesn't come together at the last second and you snip the wire. It's a very dirty, messy process that really only in hindsight can you see the fruits of your labor. And it's said so many times, but I know personally two of my good friends who I used to work security with at a bar, Prince Blackosh from Kosovo and Ivan Georgiev from Sofia, Bulgaria, both my age, both drag their balls through glass to get a green card and then to get their citizenship here. And they have both gone farther than I ever will because they have a fire that they know what it's like to go without. And you coming from a communist revolution by yourself, the only time ever seeing your dad cry. And then instead of coming here, and I think you said it towards the end of the book, it was just to come here and have the opportunity to work and to keep the fruits of our labor, not asking for anything. I mean, what a crazy idea. The ability to work your ass off and just get to keep the fruits of your labor. And at the beginning, you go in and say, if you say you want to join the FBI, you want to join the Air Force, mom will cry, dad will be proud, so on and so forth. But there seems to be a guttural, reflexive, and inaccurate reaction to someone saying they want to join the CIA, right? It's they're drug dealers, they're gun runners, it's black ops. And you talk about your time there from the beginning to the end, how really they are the most heroic men and women that the world has ever seen. And if you can't tell, when I get nervous talking to a guest, I tend to talk a lot, which I normally don't do. What are your thoughts on the CIA now? What are your thoughts on my generation of millennials who seem to think that America is the great Satan? And where do you see the future of America going? I know there are several questions in there, so let's just start from the beginning. How do you view the CIA today?
That's a very good question, and one that I can caveat a little bit with the fact that I am prejudiced because it is my alma mater. But the one thing that I can assure you, Tommy, is that no matter how bad things are politically, how much the chasms are internally, the CIA continues to do things that only the CIA can do. We're not State Department. We're not the Federal Bureau of Investigations. We're a Central Intelligence Agency. There's only two things that we do. We steal secrets for our president, and we do covert action for our president. That's pretty much it. Yes, we do analytical. Yes, we do this, but that is the core value of what the agency is. We've had good times, we've had better times, we've had bad times. I think we're coming out of a bad time, and I think we're going into hopefully in the future we will get a little bit more traction. But the single biggest problem for me with the agencies is when they put political appointees at the helm of an organization that is as esoteric and counterintuitive as intelligence operations are. And my point is one of two. First, credibility. If you haven't come through the ranks, if you haven't sat like I have with a terrorist in a car in a back alley debriefing him for intel, if you have never done a surveillance detection route, if you never almost lost your life, how do you empathize with your troops? How do you respect and admire your troops? A 2-hour briefing by a staffer ain't going to do it. So I'm a firm believer that we have plenty of smart enough people in the agency. Jose Rodriguez, for one, who was my boss in CTC at once and was DDO subsequently. Those are the Code for Black, legendary friend. Those are the kind of people that should rise to the DCI positions, because then they have the best interest of the agency and of the mission. No matter who is in power, we're supposed to be a neutral organization like the military. So that's my take on the agency. They're still doing some great work. Recruiting is going to be a little harder because there is something that leads to your second question about this generation. And I've said this very often. I mean, the biggest problem in the United States is we do not know how good we have it. We don't know how good we have it. I had a lady a few months ago. I was talking giving a public talk, and she said, "Well, I've been to Mexico, and it was great." I said, "Ma'am, you went to Cancun on a cruise. You have never go to Guadalajara, go to some of these places." So even when Americans travel, we travel either on business class, 5-star hotels. There's a big difference between that and living in a third world country, living in a second world country, worse yet, living in a country that is either under the yoke of communism or the yoke of terrorist type radicalism. So
I forgot who said it. I had a friend who's traveled extensively, and I never traveled when I didn't grow up hard. I went to private Catholic school. I have loving parents. I've known nothing but opportunity. Um, I was pre-med in college. I got into medical school. Actually, graduated from the University of Georgia. Got into the University of Miami, Miller School of Medicine, downtown Miami. And unlike you, where you can blend in, I don't think my fluorescent Irish skin was going to do too well there. I ultimately decided not to go. I got in. It's probably my proudest achievement to date. Decided not to go, but I was studying all the time. I had a lot of friends who went and studied abroad in Europe, and hey, that's cool. I didn't have the time to do that because to me it was organic chemistry. I was going to be studying 13 hours a day, regardless if I could see the Eiffel Tower or just see the Bulldogs practicing. So, but a lot of them would come back and they'd say, the people who love America the most are the people that have never left. I said, the more you travel, the more you realize that we're not all that. And hey, that's fine. You don't have to like it. I'm not here to tell you you have to like it. I'm not here to tell you you have to, like the Red Sox or the Yankees. That's fine. But I've heard that before. The more you travel, the more you realize America is not so hot. And that the more time you spend abroad, you realize how great it is abroad. Well, one, I've never met anyone who has permanently left the United States, so that's bullshit. And two, the people I know who have spent the most time out of the United States, Ivan Georgiev and Prince Blagosh, who grew up in former Soviet bloc nations. Prince's father he was a journalist in Kosovo. He published a bad story on the Serbians in the late 90s, had his arms and legs broken and was left on the front lawn. Luckily, he survived, and Prince remembers Marines standing guard outside of his house. Now, sure, you could criticize this and say this is jingoism, this is blind nationalism, and that's your right to criticize this. But the people I know who have spent the most time out of here are the ones who love it far more than I have a flag behind me when I do the podcast. My buddies from Europe they're the most obnoxious red, white, and blue sunglasses, little flags in their hats, and they'll tear you a new one if you say anything bad about it. So I do see that. And it is disgusting to me. And it's also beautiful that that is part of America, is you're allowed to criticize it. And you can't do that anywhere else. But and I'm hoping that maybe you can give me some optimism. I try to look at things in the grand scheme of the United States. You know, we've been at war before. We've been invaded, 1812, been in two world wars. We've been in Vietnam. We went toe to toe with the Soviets. We almost blew ourselves up in 62. And I also look at the movement in the 60s and 70s. And I can only imagine that. I mean, it's one thing to see kids today not loving the United States. I can only imagine living World War II veterans 20 years out of Okinawa seeing hippies burn the flag. So I feel like we've been here before. And you don't have to sugarcoat it. You can shit on it. Is there reason to be optimistic? Will the cream still rise to the top, or are we on a downward spiral?
I'm an optimist. Besides being a patriot, like you mentioned, my debt of honor to this country, in spite of what I've tried to do, is still current. That's the reason for the book. I felt that this would be my last firefight, where I could put a realistic light of what my agency really does, and most importantly, what my colleagues, some who are no longer with us, have done for God and country. So, I taught at Fort Bragg for about 7 years. 3 years ago, I stopped. And the one thing I used to come home and tell my wife, I said, this country will never have a shortage of warriors. We will never have a shortage of warriors. We lack leadership. And that is one of the things that we need for. During Trump's first election, there were 11 candidates, Republican candidates on that stage, and not a single one had served this country in any other way in politics. And the reason I say it goes back to what I said about the agency. It's different when you have a George W. Bush Sr., who's a World War II veteran, who saw his friends die, who saw the impact of friendly death, who saw the impact of a successful war, leading individuals like myself and my colleagues. It is what we need. History repeats itself constantly. We don't learn from it. We really don't. And I don't like getting into politics, but I do like history. And I will give you an example. When Jimmy Carter took power, Jimmy Carter was one of the nicest, most moral guy that walked this earth. Nobody could argue that. But he was seen naive, and he was seen as weak. As soon as he took power, Afghanistan was invaded by the Russians, by the Soviets then. Shortly thereafter, around that time, our hostages in Iran go there for 444 days. He gave away the Panama Canal, which is one of the most strategic landmarks that we have in this continent, and almost pulled the troops out of South Korea. So my point is, when the isms that we're fighting, communism, anarchism, they are all predatory animals. And if we come across as food, they're going to try to eat us. And I think that there's plenty of examples of that. And going back to the hostage crisis, the day that Ronald Reagan raised his hand to be sworn in as president, the hostages were released minutes later. Why do you think that happened?
It's kind of like when me and my three brothers would be being exceptionally rude. And it was a rare occasion when mom couldn't discipline us. My mom's a hard ass. But every once in a while, even at like 10, we'd start to push back a little bit. Second dad came home, total ceasefire. Say what you want. It wasn't a coincidence.
Yeah. No, it wasn't. It wasn't that. The enemy reads us and plans against us. The other big disadvantage that we have here, besides the ridiculousness of no term limits for people to serve, is the fact that we have 4-year plans, actually 3-year plans, because by the 4th year, that leader has to start going back for, for a re-election and everything else, where the Russians and the Chinese and the Iranians have 100-year plans. Chinese have literally 15
Yeah.
year long plans and must tweak it as necessary to capitalize on opportunities. But they know where they want to get 50 years from now. The Russians definitely do. The Iranians definitely do. They have different goals, but they're all antagonistic to what we represent, which is, like you said earlier, the ability to be in a country where you can say this administration sucks or that administration sucks, and you don't get kneecapped and you don't get disappeared. So
Yeah, the Chinese, right? The literal 100-year marathon, 1949 to 2049. I've interviewed Brigadier General Robert Spalding, one-star general, B-2 Spirit pilot, was in Obama's National Security Council and then at the Hudson Institute. And I think he has his own company now. But his book, Stealth War, about the Chinese economic and social cyber war against us. And then his senior, Michael Pillsbury, who I believe was the Deputy Secretary of Defense, I want to say under Reagan, it might have been HW, his book, The 100-Year Marathon, about just that. If, regardless of even going into those, if you just bring up that the Chinese have a 100-year plan, people look at you like it's nuts, despite it being an it's not classified. It's not even a white paper. It's just they just talk about it. They'll tweet it. They'll call it the 2049 plan. They do think on that level. Kind of like what Ben Franklin said, what kind of government do we have? A republic if you can keep it. There seems to be some things that do come with democracy, with a republic. We do have 4-year plans, or as you said, 3-year plans, and that is a drawback. But I don't think you can have your cake and eat it too. I think in order to have a government of self-rule, the drawback is that you have 3-year plans, and that's a major thorn in the side. You can't deny that. If you want to be an all natural bodybuilder, my friend from Bulgaria, Ivan, that I mentioned earlier, is an all natural bodybuilder, makes a living off of it. He's sponsored, lives out in Vegas. He looks like the Terminator. Every woman loves him. I mean, you want to hate him, but he's the sweetest guy in the world. But I mean, he talks about it. He was like, told me I could make so much more money. I could make so much more money if I was just doing steroids. But on the other hand, he's like, I don't want my balls to go away and I want to live a long time. And so, there's your double-edged sword. He wants to live a long time. He wants to have kids and grandkids. He's probably not going to be on the front of Bodybuilding magazine, but he's going to make a pretty penny. And the guy that does go that way is going to make more money, probably going to be dead at 40. I know that's kind of an absurd analogy, but okay, let's look at this podcast. The one thing I really stand for above all else is free speech. I'll have you on and talk about how great America is, and I'll have someone on and tell me how bad America is, but I won't ever censor anything. And that's why I got permanently banned from YouTube, was for interviewing Dr. McCullough and Dr. Malone, who just talked about vaccines. Give me the thumbs up. That's my stamp of approval. I could be making a lot more money if I had just shut up and gone along. But I do stand for something, and I don't make as much money, but I respect myself. I look in the mirror and I don't want to beat the shit out of myself. So there are, pluses and minuses to a government of self-rule. But I think at the core of it is there has to be an inherent love of this nation. And even if you don't love the nation, as long as there are still some, like you talk about, the silent warriors, you don't get a ticker tape parade. You're not kissing the nurse in Times Square. As you've said, as Dale Comstock said, as Boz has said, there's no one knows. You don't want anyone to know, because that's not why you're doing it. You're doing it because it's the right thing to do. That is curtailed when you have a leader or leaders who either don't know what to do or they have inherent anti-American beliefs. Is something like the CIA, you talk about towards the end of your book, we always believe there was an agency within the agency, the super secret, ultra secret. And then as you climb up, you realize it's not there, right? I do like to think that there is someone inside that won't idly stand by as our nation is seemingly being demolished from within. I don't even really know if there's a question in there. But your thoughts on, we're at a different war. This isn't invading Normandy. This is through social media. This is through censorship. This is through wokeism. This is through the destruction of the nuclear family. This is through inflation. This is through non-existent borders. This is through unconstitutional vaccine mandates. This is through calling every male that wants to support the nation a Nazi. It's a different form of warfare, but it's efficient. How will the United States, not that you have a crystal ball, but how will the United States win this ever evolving battlefield?
I think that one of the things that we got going for us right now, that things are going so bad and have been for a little bit, the people are starting to wake up. We're a pragmatic nation. Not everybody is really deep into things like you and I are talking about right now. But when things are really affecting your family, your ability to teach your kids, to pay their schools, to pay the electricity, to feed them. So I think that there's enough interest out there in making some kind of positive change that hopefully will show both parties that we need to have more than a 3-year plan. And that's the difference, Tommy. I'm not saying that we should ever give up the idea of 4-year terms for a
Sure.
president with a that is sacrosanct. The reason they do that in China and they do that in Russia is because they got the perpetual control over everybody. And that's not the United States that I fight for. So I'm totally in agreement with that. That said, I think that anybody who holds office has to first and foremost defend this country. We have a lot of people, even in our politics, putting our country down. And that's doing a favor to the enemies that are spending money in psychological operations against us. You don't think that the Chinese and the Russians and the Iranians capitalize on every little, picadillo that's going on in the United States? Of course. Guess what? So do we.
Sure.
That's the game. Only that we're making it extremely easy for them and cheap, because they're barely having to invest other than stir the pot a little bit once in a while. So, I'm an optimist. I honestly hope that we can become a little bit more central. I think there's been a wide divide between, the Democratic Party and the Republican Party. I understand the differences. I have no problem with them, except that there's a radical element of formulating, which to me is anti-American. And any politician that I vote for has to convince me that he or she loves this country.
Trying to remain optimistic, and I normally get shit on for that, for being optimistic. Most notably, Dale Comstock, he's probably been on here 50 times, former Delta Force. I'll be like, Dale, we got to stay optimistic, and he'll be like, Tom, you need to be loading your gun, boiling water, getting food, and I'll be like, no, Dale, we got to stay optimistic. So I get that, but I have to for my own sanity, so I can wake up and keep going. Is there a silver lining? And I believe this is kind of what you were getting at. So let's look at the body, right? When your body actually starts to starve, right? I can talk about this in the biology wheelhouse. When your body starts to starve, the first thing you do is you start burning fat, and then you start burning muscle. But if you cut below such a low threshold, your body will actually slow down its metabolic rate. It's the only proven thing to actually increase lifespan in mice and dogs. And it's insane. You start activating all these pathways, all these genetic pathways to burn less, right? I eat a little less than I should because I got some chub that I need to get rid of. I'm 32. I can't be saying I'm old. I still don't have that excuse. There's a different level though in true starvation, where the billion years of evolution comes in hand. I would like to imagine, we know there's a DEFCON system. We know there's a COGCON system, continuity of government, continuity of operations, enduring constitutional government. There are things that our country mirrors, and that's one of my favorite books, Raven Rock by Garrett Graff, all about continuity of government. I talk about it nonstop. There are things that happen. For instance, on September 11th, 2001, the gears, the cogs, if you will, of continuity of government start turning. Lines of Succession, Air Force One, the E-4B Night Watch, the blast doors at NORAD, Mount Weather, Raven Rock, the Greenbrier Hotel. All these things start shifting. You start moving different assets. Notifications go out. I believe we notified Putin on September 11th, 2001, so we are not preparing for a first strike, but we know you're looking at our stuff as you always do, and we are moving everything. There are effects that come from that. Could there be a silver lining in that we are seeming to stray so far from the acknowledgement and realization of where we are, that we are in, for its drawbacks, we are in the Garden of Eden. It doesn't get much better than this. Not much, it doesn't get better than this. Sometimes you need to have a little bit taken away before people start to stand up, right? If you just went to 1965, right, and you got guys like my great uncle Rich, who was 18 on Omaha Beach, and you saw a bunch of hippies, right, or me at 18, you'd probably say this place is so screwed. What happened? But it's almost been 60 years since then, and I've interviewed a ton of guys who were born after that date who are as patriotic as the day is long. So sometimes you kind of got to get kicked in the balls. Sometimes you got to be told no. Sometimes you got to just get turned down by a hot girl at the bar before you're like, oh God, I'm not 18 anymore. I got to hit the gym. Sometimes you really do need a kick in the ass to get going. And like a genetic pathway or like DEF CON, it's not all bad. Things get set into motion. You start sharpening the blade. And you go, all right, I'm not top dog, right? They always say it's easy to win a championship. It's harder to defend it. Is there a silver lining in all of this? Is there a silver lining in the America's a bunch of Nazis. We're an imperialist power. We're terrible. China's social credit score is great. We're polluting the world. You kind of need to see all that to have a bunch of guys like myself just 2 years ago. I'd interview a Delta Force guy because it was neat versus now I'm like, what is actually wrong with this nation? Maybe you need that. Maybe you need to have a bunch of cocky 32-year-olds like myself who have taken the First Amendment, the Second Amendment, the Fourth Amendment, the Fifth, all for granted until it starts getting taken away from you and you realize, oh, someone has to defend this. And then eventually the realization comes, oh, no one's doing this for me. I have to do it. Is there any logic in that? Or is this just delusional optimism?
No, I mean, look, I'm an optimist, like I said before, but like your Delta friend, I have ammo and I have guns and I
Yeah.
know food and I know I can survive. And worst comes to worst, I'll steal it. But that is, in my profession, we have a saying that what usually doesn't happen is what you prepare for. So that's the prep part of myself. But I am optimistic. Um, there's a maturity process here. A lot of the negative stuff that you're hearing in the middle of a generation, which, in my age, when you were 20 years old, you were you were already a grown-up person. That was the kind of like the standard. Let's face it. Now people don't even get married until they're in their 30s. So I think that there's evolution from the idea of a teenager that believes that other things better than what they have. That their iPad not working is not just a first world problem. And then all of a sudden they start maturing because they get married, they have children. Children are the most wonderful thing to ground you on, because all of a sudden, all the fantasies, all the utopias seem to fade for the realism that you have that kid to take care of. And so that's what I'm hoping, that as a nation we mature, that this generation does. I honestly believe that it's not going to be a drastic change. I don't want a drastic change. Drastic changes are counterproductive. But we do need to shift our political parties to a posture that we are looking out for the best of the country. The one example that I always use, being Cuban, and as you know, I came to Cuba by myself to an orphanage and all that. You know how many thousands of Cubans are dead in the ocean from trying to leave Cuba in things like bathtubs, 55-gallon drums, 12-foot boats, thousands. Now, name me how many Americans have died trying to leave Key West to go to Cuba? Zero. So I do believe that there's certain realities that people are going to start feeling. You know, the gas is one of the things that I think has got people's attention because it's affecting everybody, right or left. It is so hopefully, if we could start thinking more of what's good for America, what's good for us, because I will tell you the one thing that is for me, I should make a plaque out of this. I pray every day that God does not forget the United States, because the day that it forgets, he or she forgets the United States, he's given up on the world, because we are the only entity out there that is willing and able and proven with our allies. Don't get me wrong, I'm all about the Brits,
Sure.
great with the Aussies, even the Poles are good allies. But at the end of the day, you know, whether it was World War I or World War II, or the fight on communism and the fight in terrorism, the United States has always been the country that puts not only his financial, but his personal gain. Like the old saying, the only territory that the United States gained after World War II were the cemeteries of our veterans overseas.
Yes, sir. And it's the only one that does do that. It's in the world of doing the right thing. We can all have these ideas of, I want to do this and I want to do that. And then push comes to shove, and you're like, I got to pay my power bill. I got to pay my internet bill. I got nothing to give to anybody else. How absurd is it that at the biggest level, there is a country that not in some wishy-washy, we'll build a bench and put a plaque on it that says world peace, that there's actually a nation that will even try to do the right thing. That's absurd. Like, that is absurdity. That's actually doing the right thing. To me, that is the idea that that is not just a propaganda piece. And I'm sure there are critics that will say that. And hey, again, what a beautiful place where you can criticize it and you're not decapitated in the street. I do think that there is an importance in acknowledging that there is no other bastion. There's nowhere else to run. You can emigrate. I mean, if you want to go live in, sure you can. But in terms of running from a threat, from a communist takeover, from a theocratic dictatorship, where North Korea, if you leave, your grandmother will be killed, or in Iran, where if you're gay, you'll be beheaded and thrown off a building. Not only is there a place to run to, and not only is it a first world nation, it is the most advanced first world nation with the biggest guns and weapon systems the planet's ever seen. That doesn't happen. This is a fluke. This is a you roll the dice 10,000 times. How many times will you get double sixes that land on top of each other? And we're taking this double six and going, see? Yeah, I grew up in New Hampshire, and I'm not a huge sports fan, but all my family is. I don't really appreciate that I got to see the Patriots win in 2001, 2003, 2004, see the Red Sox win in 2004, 2007, 2008, see the Celtics win, the Bruins. I've barely ever played. I went to the University of Georgia, I went to one football game, but I grew up with the norm being, oh, you just get Tom Brady. What do you mean you haven't seen 7 Super Bowls by the time you graduate college? All my friends in Atlanta are going wild when they're in the Super Bowl at the Patriots. I didn't care, and then when we won, I was like, yeah, oh no, there's another one. To me, that is what it's like to be an American: is to grow up in New England, unaware of the Red Sox curse from 1918 to 2004, and unaware of what it's like to not have Tom Brady. I didn't know what it was. Versus when I went to Valdosta State University for my first 2 years of college. I mean, it was good. I think most people in the world would kill to be able to go to an American institution, but it wasn't great. When I went to a pre-med advisor, she said you should really think about something else because your grades are terrible. And I was like, well, I think I'd like to be a doctor. And she was like, well, maybe you should try something else. And I was like, all right, fuck you. No one really cared. If you tried to get better in class, no one really cared. You had a professor that maybe cared. And that was the only time in my life that I've only ever experienced relative suffering. And then I transferred to the University of Georgia, and I can only imagine that that is the feeling times 10,000 what an immigrant feels. The facilities were better. They didn't just have they had a whole building just for pre-med students. They had doctors that would come and teach and give you advice on how to craft a letter of recommendation. There was a hospital that had a literal program with the University of Georgia. You can come shadow here and get volunteer hours. I came there and I was like, are you kidding me? I ran a train on it. I was like, I'm using every expense you guys have. I maxed out my letters of recommendation. I maxed out my shadowing hours at the hospital to the point where they're like, dude, stop coming. Like I did it all and I got into medical school. And I remember thinking, everyone here, I'm like, you don't know what you have. And that's from a guy that went to private Catholic school my whole life. I've never experienced wanting. I've never gone hungry. I kind of think that's what you need. Is sometimes you need to just feel the burn of not having it as great. And you can hear individuals like yourself talking about it, but it really doesn't hit home in the bones until you experience it yourself. And I think right now, for the first time, a lot of people are experiencing it. Their groceries are twice as much. They can't get gas. For the first time ever, they're being told you can't talk about certain things online. Maybe this is what we need. Maybe you need a taste of communism to get your act up. I don't know. Again, not really a question in there. I'm just rambling to you, but
No, but I totally agree, Tommy. I mean, we, like I said, we don't know how good we have it. So we take for granted what we have. And I believe that this shift right now, economic wise and everything else, we've had some great periods after some terrible periods, from the previous recessions and world wars and the Big Depression and all that kind of stuff. People who survive those come back stronger, more determined, and I think that that's the backbone of this country. When my father, a lot of Cubans, when they left Cuba to come to the United States, their dream was to go back. Their dream was to go back because that's where mom was, or where my grandfather's grave, and all that great stuff. My father had been in this country maybe 2 months, and got his first job because he was loading trucks and mowing lawns for quite a while there. He said, "We're not going anywhere." We became citizens, residents and citizens, the day we were legally allowed to do so. And my dad, until the day that he died, never missed voting in an election. That's the example that I grew up with. The appreciation for the country. Don't get me wrong, my dad loved Cuba. I remember a lot about Cuba. You saw it from the book. I experienced a lot of things in Cuba. I have incredible memory, especially of my childhood, because it was far from normal, for lack of a better word. But absolutely, I think that we're in a position to come out of this better. Of course, the other side of the coin is if we do not, it's like an airplane. You can only let it lose power and high, altitude before you can pull it back up. So I'm hoping that we'll start doing some normal, recovery, and go from there.
You mentioned several times in your book, and I actually earlier this year read, I think the author died like 20 years ago. I didn't realize it till after I was finished with the book, so I was kind of put down. But I read Donovan, about Wild Bill Donovan. And I mean, that guy was an absolute madman. I mean, what did he say? He was in World War I and he was leading soldiers, and like they were getting shot at and the soldiers were vomiting. And I think that's when he got his nickname, right? They're like, why do you keep going? And he's like, what an honor it is to die in the fight. And they're like, this guy's wild. And for everyone that doesn't know, he was involved at not involved, headed up the OSS, the precursor, the predecessor to the CIA. And you have legends like Billy Waugh, who I first heard about him several years ago in Annie Jacobson's book, Surprise Kill Vanish. And he is just, I mean, he is the original, he is the Babe Ruth of special forces. And I know you got to know him and train under him. When you
Billy is a very, very good friend of mine, and is a perfect example of the kind of warriors we have.
Yeah.
The reason I'm smiling is because just 2 days ago, I got this in the mail.
Billy Waugh.
And this is demo knife. There's a author, of course, you've heard of Robert Young Pelton, and he's good friends with Billy. And he was making fun of the knife that I have on the cover of the book. And I told him, I said, I didn't pick that. That was what the publishers thought was, this is the Billy Waugh signed knife. So I was talking to him yesterday, thanking him for letting Pelton do that for me.
That's awesome.
Perfect topic for me. You know, Wild Bill Donovan, I have a crap load of books in my house, but there's 3 books that sit behind my desk. And that is Wild Bill Donovan's story, Teddy Roosevelt, and Wyatt Earp.
Yeah.
For me, there's something that's said there, and they all have that madness, but for a good reason.
Yeah.
It's like, you know, thou shalt not steal. Well, that is true, but I have stolen.
Yeah.
Secrets, equipment, whatever it is, but I did it not for my personal gain. I did it for my country. So yeah, I think that there's a little bit of madness in most people who really go to the end to fight and make a difference. And Wild Bill Donovan's a perfect example. You know, Medal of Honor winner, First World War guy, starts the OSS, gives birth to the CIA. I mean, it just goes on and on and on. So glad to hear we're mutual fans.
Wild Bill had, I think, probably my favorite. There's 2 of my favorite things. One was when he was in Paris, and I guess Ernest Hemingway was there, and they like commandeered. Oh, I don't think it was an army Jeep. I think it was like some like 1920s model, just like big kind of like Corella DeVille, long, swooping, Great Gatsby-ish car. They like commandeered that and were just tearing through the streets of Nazi occupied Paris. And like I think like Hemingway had a cigar and Donovan was holding like a 1918 or something. And there was some soldier that wrote about it like decades later. And he's like, he's like, I'd never done a drug in my life, but I swore I was high because I looked twice. And it's, is that Ernest Hemingway and Bill Donovan and Nazi occupied? And the legend is that they go into the Ritz-Carlton and that there were Nazis jumping out of windows and tying bed sheets together and leaving as they went in, because they went in, it was Donovan, Hemingway, and I think 67 GIs, and they went in and they like fired a round of gunfire and then said we need 69 martinis. And that night Donovan's like, I slept in a bed that the night before a Hugo Boss wearing SS officer was in. That's one insane story. Another one is I think it was like the first silenced pistol, I guess the precursor to like the well rod, maybe it was the well rod, and he wanted to show it off to FDR, and he was buddies with FDR, and FDR, for all the criticisms from him, like he at least had the foresight to listen to Donovan on several things. And Donovan walks into the Oval Office. FDR is in his wheelchair, and he's talking to a secretary, but she's next to him, and they're both like looking out the window or something. Donovan walks in behind them, and he takes a sandbag and he takes the pistol and he fires 7 rounds into it, empties it, completely silent. And then she leaves, and FDR turns around with his big like French cigarette, and he's like, Bill. And he goes up to him and he flips the pistol around, wraps the silencer in a cloth, and he hands him the handle. And he goes, watch your hand, don't get burned. To show him, they, instead of just walk, because maybe he thinks he's lying. Hey, look, I just shot this 7 times. Well, you could have just brought in a sandbag with 7 bullet holes. He goes, watch the handle, Mr. President. And that was, I forget what led to that, but that led to like, he was like, all right, Bill, like whatever you need, go get it. I just walked into the Oval Office, shot 7 rounds, and then handed him the pistol. That's insane. Oh, and then sorry, the last one. The last one is they had created a gun that was actually a camera. And it was, the trigger was to capture, had the big scope on it, and they'd sent some like OSS boys to the roof across the White House. And he was like, take some pictures. And he said the guys were scared shitless. And you can like look through the pictures, and the first one's them seeing like some Marines outside. This is after Pearl Harbor. The second picture is one Marine noticing them. The third picture is like all of them pointing up. And then the fourth picture is them getting on a tripod, and one of them starts to feed it, and they stood up and like Donovan ran across the street and was like, "It's all good. It's OSS." Like, but sorry, I don't mean to be fanboying about Wild Bill Donovan, but that guy was insane. That guy was absolutely insane. Yeah, it's. But was I going with that?
But you know, I had the one of the biggest honors for me in the agency was working for, well, Bill Casey.
Oh yeah.
Bill Casey was another legendary guy, very different than Wild Bill Donovan, because he was not a physical guy. He was a very smart, very, very smart man, but he was fearless. I see that in real leaders. You know, guys like Kofor Black. Kofor was my boss in CTC when 9/11 happened. He was chief of station in Khartoum when Billy Watt found Carlos the Jackal and was doing surveillance on bin Laden on my behalf, because at the time I was deputy chief of the bin Laden task force called Shinalik. So you know, the madness that runs through guys like the Wild Bills, he literally wasn't afraid of anything. And he made, you know, the dictum for us to go into Nicaragua and help the Contras overthrow that communist regime, which we did through election. We forced them to a legal election and they lost. So that's a covert action star on the wall for several reasons. But I really enjoyed talking to Bill Casey because I had always read about Bill Donovan. And now I have almost like the reincarnation of one of my childhood heroes.
They were a different level of controlled insanity, and so and I look at like a Billy Waugh, and I can only imagine, and maybe I'm not putting words in your mouth, but thoughts in your head. I know for me, whenever I look at someone that's come before me, whether it's like my dad or I love doing a podcast. I've been doing it for 2.5 years, almost 3 years. And then I look at, I started listening to Joe Rogan probably less than a year after he started his podcast. I didn't even know it was a podcast. I was just listening to clips when I was pre-med and I was like, I like this guy. And kind of watching him turn into what he is now. And there's part of me that will just always like look up to that, right? Being pre-med, my uncle, my godfather, who I'm named after, went to Duke Medical School. Halfway through medical school, got in a car crash and had half of his brain destroyed, and then went back to medical school and still graduated. And he said, "Look, I did it with half a brain. You can do it with your whole brain." There's a certain level of just like respect that I'll always have, and I think it's good. I think it's what keeps us pushing forward. Is whether or not Tom Brady is better than his role model, it's always good to put them on pedestals because it drives you to new heights. And then the guy after you will go, I got to get better. And that's just why we get better and better. Do you look at someone like Billy Waugh, and do they cast a shadow on you in your mind? Or do you see eye to eye with him? And I know obviously he's still alive. And so I don't know if that's weird, but is there any sort of, and there's a question after this, but do you?
I will tell you, I was literally on the phone with him yesterday because of the night he told me, and shooting the crap. And he's 92 years old.
Mm-hmm.
He's got 8 holes in his body, left for dead. He jumped the nukes. So he's done all these crazy things. So, a lot of people, will say, oh, like Billy. I said, no. I said, look, I have stayed humble, not because I'm humble, but because I was always surrounded by people that were bigger than life.
Yeah.
My boss in Honduras, when I started the Contra program, was a guy named Colonel Ray. Can't tell the last name. He jumped into Corregidor when he was 18.
Jesus Christ.
He was Army Special Forces, and he was one of our guys in Laos for the agency. That was my boss. Those kind of individuals, you sit there. Dewey Claridge, the guy who started the Counterterrorist Center. I was always surrounded by individuals that were bigger than life, and Billy Waugh was one of them. I mean, Billy Waugh, when he finished his SF career and had a little side turn there doing some stupid stuff, he came into the agency on contract, and he did over 20 years with us. I met him in the 1990s when we became friends. So I cannot compare myself to Billy Waugh. I think the one thing that one of the many things I love about Billy is that he still doesn't think he did enough.
Yeah.
He still does not think that he did enough.
Yeah. And but
That's 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 warrior. Yeah.
that's what drives that madness is what drives you to untouched heights. You have to be, I mean, there's a level of insanity. There's a there's a story of I forget who, again, I don't follow sports at all, but some guy on a different team, Tom Brady invited him out to like his mansion. And he was like, "Oh, it's so cool. I'm gonna go shoot the shit with the goat." And he's like, "Maybe I'll finesse this into getting traded to the Patriots." And he goes there and whatever, loafers, like a polo. He goes, "Brady had me running routes in his backyard, like carefully manicured backyard. He had me running over flowers, knocking over. He's screaming at me. He's like, I was sweating, and like at the end of the day, I threw up on like my Gucci pants, and it was like off season. And but he never once to him it was just this is another day. Why are we not sharpening the sword? And you have to have that to consider that when you look at yourself like that and you go, I it's not that I'm humbled, like I'm humbled, right? There's one thing to be humble. It's another thing to involuntary being humble invokes there's some sort of conscious act. Being humbled is a no, I didn't take a knee, I was put on my knees. But I would imagine he probably looks at you and is like, this guy's a real one. So when you look at that and you can't compare yourself to him, but in my mind, I'm like, what do you mean? You're both insane. Is there any hope in there? I always use this analogy. My dad would be like, "You guys are always on your cell phones. You're always doing this," and I'm like, "And your dad was probably like, you got all you guys do is watch TV, and his dad was probably like, all you do is listen to radio, and his dad's probably like, all you guys do is use the telegram, and his dad's probably like, what are these cars? We used to use horses, and back in the 1812, they're like, my dad used to use a musket, and the guy before that had a powdered wig, and the guy before that came over on the Mayflower, and I got on and on, which is great. That's what pushes us forward." And I'm sure God, if I ever have kids one day, I'll look ahead and be like, you're always in your VR helmets, and it'll go on forever. But we somehow managed to keep going. Is the fact that you look at Mr. Waugh and are humbled, is there any logical optimism in there to say, well, then it will keep going?
It is because, like I mentioned, when I work guys, and I mean special operations forces, because that course that I taught, it's advanced special techniques. You got SEALs, you have pararescue, you have combat controllers, you have Marine Raiders, and of course Green Berets. And I used to bring Billy Waugh in all the time to dinner afterwards, just bring the instructors and some of the students, because I wanted them to meet somebody of that caliber. I think that when you have icons like that, they do give us hope, they give us guidance, they give us an example, and they kind of what you alluded to with the insanity, that insanity for the right reasons, if you're doing it for the right reasons, usually get some hellacious results. Because let's face it, CIA does things that no other agency does. And we have a joke. We always say, if it was easy, State Department would do it.
Yeah.
We are supposed to do the things that nobody else is set up to do. And all overseas, we don't do stuff in the States. But without a doubt, leaders are leaders, and that's what we need more of. And even in those brackets, like Billy Waugh was a leader. He's always been a leader. He was a leader in the agency. He was definitely a leader in Vietnam, but by example, not by just words and philosophies and stuff. He was the real deal. He is the real deal.
Didn't he try to enlist when he was like 13 years old or something? He, in Annie Jacobson's book, he talks about how he was in a movie theater and like the sheriff came in of whatever town he was in. And, they're like, Pearl Harbor's been bombed. And he got so jacked up. I think he like ran away. He like saved up his money, bought a pair of boots at an army surplus store and tried to enlist. And then like the enlister like called his mom because he was like 13 or something. It's like,
Yep.
no, you can't do
True,
this.
true
Yeah.
story.
Yeah, just madness, but controlled madness, not cowboy, not I have a death wish, but rather the sort of like it's a game of chicken. Like, do you want crazy? Like I'll go crazy with you. Like we'll dance. Like one of us isn't going home, and I don't care who it is. You kind of got to go full like as white as I am. I think I'm like 130th Apache Indian or Abenaki, and I always wonder like you got. I think you kind of have to have that sort of like you look into their eyes and you're like, oh, I don't think this guy cares if he goes home. That's how you stare them down. I mean, you talk about it. It's not the it's not the cowboy on the white horse who always does the right thing. Well, it is that, but it's also because he's the baddest motherfucker from Horizon Horizon. And we're not America is not what it is because we are all angels with rings over our head. I mean, look at Curtis LeMay, Strategic Air Command, who led up the bombing campaign over mainland Japan. They were worried about him because they wanted an untouched city to use the nuclear bomb on. And they're like, Curtis is burning this country from coast to coast. And he was at the front of the formation. He wasn't from an armchair. He was at the front smoking a cigar like a psychopath. But you have to have that. That's what I hope is that we will continue to have men of a certain level of insanity that can control it just enough because you got to go to the brink. You got to look someone else in the eyes and they're like, oh, dude, this guy, when you talk about you go into his house, right? He's at a howitzer next to a sports car and we just had a water cooled machine gun at the end of the driveway or at the end of the hallway.
Yep.
Yeah.
Louis Claire.
Yeah. You need that. That's exactly when I heard that, I was like, good. That's how I walk it out in my mind. I'm like, good. You want someone like that.
You see, the thing, Tommy, too, is our opposition has that madness.
Sure.
Because what Putin is doing right now, it's a negative madness, and it's going to, as far as I'm concerned, hopefully will be the downfall of the Soviet Union Part Two.
Yeah.
Because he's replicating what they went through in Afghanistan. But madness is nothing more than believing in something so determined that you have no limits on what you're willing to do.
Correct.
To defend it or to gain. And we call it madness because the average person says, oh, that's insane. But Tom Brady did not get to where he was by sitting around playing video games of football. It is that madness in the right channel. And no matter what your path is, if you believe in it, I've been asked that a lot with, the complexities of the agency, the fact that you cannot tell your family, the fact that, you can't brag about any of the things you do until way after and clear by the agency. And why would you go in harm's way, tour after tour after tour? Because you got to believe. You got to believe that you're making a difference. You got to believe that you have a path given by God that you need to follow, and by hook or crook, you're going to make it. And I've mentioned Kofor Black a couple of times. I believe Kofor was picked by a higher being to be in CTC when 9/11 happened.
Mm-hmm.
Because I know some great leaders in the agency, but he had that touch of madness, that touch of I don't give a bleep. I'm getting this done. And that came to President Bush. They will have flies on their eyeballs, Mr. President.
Yeah.
When we start Afghanistan, so it's madness to the people that lack that affinity and that conviction to make something right, no matter what the cost is, and that's what I try to emulate and try to teach wherever I can.
I think you could maybe say it's the desire to be the one that goes home, but if you can't go home, neither of you are going home. It's that level of I'm gonna win this, and if I don't, neither of us win this. But there is not a reality where you win this. It's just what it is.
And to do that, you have to believe in your mission. You have to believe in your cause.
You do, and nationalism is it's a big high. Religious fanaticism is a big high. You have to look at it beyond. Am I just a cog in the machine of another of another empire, the British, the Egyptian, the Genghis Khan. You have to, and that's where I always come back to, because I have to question myself all the time. I have to say, am I just seeing red, white, and blue like someone in Alexander the Great's army did? But I always have to remind myself, this is the only place where it is legal and even applauded to say, fuck this place, to say, fuck this flag. It is the only place you're able to do that and then run for office and enact change. Is the only place you can do. It's the only place where literally of any race or religion you can come here and as you said, just the opportunity to keep what I worked for. Not even given anything. Just give me what I work for. That's why I will always love weightlifting. As opposed to being pre-med and I'd get a 99 and the average would be a 45 and then everyone else gets a 60. I'd always get really angry at that because I'm like, no, I studied to have a 99 and to be higher than everyone else. What I love about weightlifting is there's no tax. It's all mine. And if I don't do anything, all that fat is all mine. It is truth. And that's one thing I'm like, the United States is weightlifting. It's the freedom to come here to work out and get to keep the muscle or to not do that. And to me, that is something worth defending. It's it's not for the glory of the queen. It is not for whatever, for the empire. It's a place where you can come here and say, I want to serve this country till the day I die, or to say, I want to cook pancakes. More power to you. Open a pancake house. Be the best one ever. That to me is something worth fighting for. To kind of pivot from there, when you look at something like 9/11 and you're in the CTC and you're watching it, and this isn't World War II where we can just roll in with tanks and just war of attrition. This isn't the Cold War where, despite all the covert ops going on, it's also nuclear tipped missiles out in Montana, on submarines, in bombers, satellite programs overhead watching everything, SOSUS nets on the coast detecting everything. That itself was an era of fighting that's now gone. All those things still exist. To box cutters and forged documents using airliners to take out buildings, to now whatever generation of warfare we're on now with, bots online, censorship, misinformation, disinformation. Just 2 weeks ago, I had on Ken Alabek, who is the head of the Soviet Union bioweapon program, defected to the United States in 1992. He said unequivocally COVID-19 was made in a lab. The premier expert on the planet. When you see this, and it's such an insane battlefield, it's not a battlefield of guns, it's websites and manufactured consent and false trending and manipulating views and likes and comments and even outright bioweapons that no border can stop. And then you look back at your own experiences with 9/11 in the wake of traditional, Cold War or World War II. Will we rise to the occasion and master this battlefield?
I believe so. I truly, truly believe so. I think that that's part of the American ethos, whether we deny it or not, or entertain it or not. I do believe that people do rise to be the best. And let's face it. A lot of people give Reagan credit for the success he had against the Soviet Union, but he had John Paul II and Margaret Thatcher in his corner too. So it is a team sport. We do have our allies and out there. So I do believe that people will continue to step up. I think that's a historical fact. You mentioned some of the past of the Genghis Khan, Alexander, and so on and so on. If you really look at it, other than the nuclear threat, we're probably living in the most peaceful times that
Yeah.
humans have ever enjoyed.
Yeah.
Especially if you live in the United States or in a democratic country, because again, places like Cuba, they still are shooting people or incarcerating them just because they have an opinion. So I do believe that people do rise to the top. We will have the leaders, but we will always have challenges, because the one thing that people, and this is not a religious comment, evil exists. in the world. Communism has one goal: to dominate your body and soul.
Yeah.
Whether it's Chinese communism, Cuban communism, Russian communism, the same thing with radical, religions. Radical religions are have one goal: is to control your mind, your body, your thought, your beliefs, to the point that there's only one rule: whoever's ruling. It's always from the top, and that's the danger of that.
It really is the antithesis of free will. Evil is when I grew up, you imagine a demon with wings and horns. But as you get older, at least for me, I realize that it's free will versus domination. There's a difference in saying, "Hey, I'm a white guy, I love the United States, I do a podcast, and you're a lesbian woman with blue hair and you have 9 dogs, and you know what? That's not my cup of tea, but more power to you." And then they go, and I actually do have some actually, I can honestly say I do have a lesbian communist friend who just looks at me and she goes, "I hate your podcast," but she goes, "You know what? It's not for me." And I'm like, that is, I would not expect that answer, but thank you. That's the difference, is to go, wow, you know what? Okay, cool. Versus this is who I am, and everyone is now required to subscribe. You are required to buy Mr. Prado's book, and you better put a flag behind your camera. That's not a love of nation. That's not voluntary. That's a form of rape. There's a form of spiritual rape. It is to insert yourself where you are not welcome and then demand to be applauded for your presence. It's not enough that you hail the state. When Kim Jong-un died, you had to be crying, and I don't know if you've ever seen those videos of people crying, and it is eerie beyond any movie I've ever seen. I'm sure there were some brainwashed people, but there are people just forcing tears out because they know if they don't cry in public, when the nice men with the AKs walk around, they're dead. That's hell. That's Dante's Inferno. It's not fire and brimstone. It's not having your ability to say, that's not my cup of tea, I don't like that. That's what it is free will versus just total presence of total power of your soul, your body, and your mind. That is evil. That is pure evil. Um, well, I know we've been running for about an hour. I could talk to you for several hours, but of courtesy, I won't keep you much longer. I did wanna I did wanna pick your brain because this is one thing I always love. Is just, as I've talked about in this podcast, from Tom Brady to Wild Bill to Ronald Reagan's SDI, Strategic Defense Initiative. I just always love the peak of the peak of the peak of the peak. It just I'll never not love it. If you're not, I'm from New England, but man, there is something awesome about the Yankees that they've just won so many. I'm sure my dad will disown me after I said that, but I'm obsessed with madness. I'm obsessed with the best ever. I don't want anything other than that. Is there, like you said, when you work in the agency, you always wonder, is there the ultra secret? Is there the eighth floor? Are there the basement warriors? Is there any evidence to that, or is it just myth? I know you said you learned that it is myth.
It is myth, and I will tell you that it's actually a good myth
Yeah.
to entertain, because it shows you that in spite of the fact that we have the Billy Walls and the Jose Rodriguez's and the Kofor Blacks, that we still, feel like we could do more, that there's got to be something more to this. And I mentioned that about Billy before. Billy is a guy who's given 40 years of his life, 60 years of his life, or 80 years of his life,
Yeah.
almost.
Yeah.
And he still does not feel like they are doing enough. And I think that's a very healthy thing to think, that, God, they turned us down on this again. There's got to be a secret CIA. There's got to be something in the basement. Well, that gives you hope, even
Yeah.
if it is a fantasy, but it speaks volumes that you are not satisfied in spite of the great successes that you're having.
Yeah. It is it's a form of psychological warfare on yourself, but instead of demoralization, it is moralization. You go,
Yeah.
there's something deeper. There's gotta be something. I studied I studied for the MCAT for 9 months, the medical college admissions test, starting in September 2012. I took the test on May 30th, 2013. And I can never get above the 60th percentile. And I hated it because I was a straight A student and I was cocky and I was like, I am better than this. I am better than this. And it was my own ego. And I just couldn't get there. And I couldn't get farther. And I just kept studying and I kept studying. And I just decided I was like, I'm going to study up until the day of the test. I don't give a shit what happens. Like I will break this or it will break me, but there's no draw. And I kept studying. And in the last like 4 days, I went from 60th percentile to 70th to 80th to 90th. And then I took the test the day of and scored in the 95th. And it was in the last 4 days of whatever 3/4 of a year is, 270 days of studying. It was the last 4 days that yielded an extra 50%, almost 50%. And it's been 9 years. I didn't go to medical school. I'm doing a podcast now, but I'm still pissed off about that 95. I'm still pissed. It's actually 95.6. Not that I remember. I'm still pissed off. I remember all my friends are like, dude, you did it. You nailed it. And I just remember staring at the score, just fuming. And I was like, I'm fucking smarter than this. I think you need that madness. That I wouldn't live a life without that madness. And a critic might say, well, you'll never be satisfied. No, no, the beauty is in the pursuit, whether it's CIA Black Ops or studying for the MCAT. The beauty is in the pursuit.
Absolutely.
It's almost a religious experience. It makes every day anew. You're like, what, how do I get better? And it's a fate worse than death to voluntarily go, I'm done. I mean, God, shoot me if I do that. If I ever do that, shoot me and bury me in an unmarked grave because my soul will have
Ain't
died.
dead, can't quit.
Hell yeah. Um, Mr. Prado, that was so cool. Thank you so much for coming on here, man. I know I've been talking your ear off, but I do that when I get nervous. And you're definitely one of the few people that, ooh, okay, I gotta get ready for this one. I rarely wear a polo, but that's my sign of respect. But yeah,
Thank
dude,
you.
you're definitely one of the coolest guys I've interviewed. You're up there with Charlie Duke, the youngest man to walk on the moon. That guy was another. You talk to him, you talk about, yeah, madness. You got to have that madness. And I will shamelessly ask, please put in a good word to Billy Waugh for me. I've tried to get him on here for the last couple of years. I just assume he's not doing interviews. But I have I'm dumb enough to email former Ground Branch guys and lucky enough to get him to come on now. I'm 4 for 4. Well, not Billy Waugh, so I'm 4 for 5. Just put in a good word for me. And
But
your closing
I
thought,
tell you what,
sir.
if you're ever willing to do it in person, I can make that happen because I've done it for a couple. As a matter of fact, Recoil magazine, which I'm sure you're aware of, is doing a piece on the book and on my book and everything else. And it was the same thing. Tom Marshall, who's the editor, says, "Rick, I see that you know Billy Waugh. Can you? I mean, I want to interview him." Well, it's doing. He cannot really leave the house anymore.
Sure.
His legs are very in bad shape. That's what most of his rounds when he was blown up and shot up. So, hey, if you're ever willing to travel to Tampa to meet him, I will be gladly to broker that. Don't wait too long because let's face it, 92 is the wrong side of the calendar. So.
Yes, sir. I will 100% make that happen. That will be my personal journey because I hate the heat. I'm in Maryland and it's too hot for me. But I will go down into the depths of hell. I would love to do that. That would be amazing. I will 100% do that. Um, you're the coolest, Mr. Prado. Thank you so much for coming on here. Please go get his book. It is insane. There's nothing more badass than what was it? You put 2 sim rounds in his face and one in his buddy's face and said, "How'd I do?" We just wanted money. Oh shit. What a great line, man. What a great line. Um, yeah, dude, you're the coolest. I would absolutely love to have you back on here. I will get back to you about interviewing Billy Waugh. I'll have to wear a diaper because I'll shit myself if I get to meet him. And thank you so much, man. Mr. Prado, closing thoughts, closing words.
Thank you very much for having me. It's really challenging dealing with somebody as smart as you. I mean, you're
Oh,
throwing stuff at me that God, I'm trying to remember what he's talking
that's
about.
that's what I strive for. When I had on Mike Durant, the Black Hawk Down pilot, I remember I emailed him. I was like, I read your book 3 times. And then he also wrote another book called Night Stalkers about the actual 160th. He got back to me and he goes, "Oh God," he goes, "I haven't thought about that stuff in 10 years." And I was like, "Good. I want to put you on your back foot. That's all I got. You're in Ground Branch, he's in
Yeah.
160th. I'm like, hey, the podcast is my arena. I'd be lying if I said I didn't take a little bit of joy on putting the heat on you. I have to. You're the best. God bless you. God bless men like you. Thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much. I'll email you this episode when it's up. Guys, go get the book. I got nothing else to say. You're the coolest. You're the coolest. You're the OG. Thank you, sir. God bless. God bless.